This is the story of how one human's simple accident aboard an alien starship sparked total medical chaos, forcing an emergency intervention that stunned an entire crew. But what exactly did the human do that shocked the alien medics so deeply? Keep watching till the end to discover the gritty, improvised secret behind human survival instincts in deep space. The corridors of the spaceship Halcyon Reach hummed quietly with the constant sound of engines, a sound the crew hardly noticed anymore. Engineers, scientists, and medics from 7 different alien species worked closely together in the tight spaces of deep space. Emergencies always brought stress, but none of them expected the shocking moment that happened that day. It began with a snap. John Carter, one of the human engineers, had been working on a misaligned pressure regulator in a tight maintenance bay near the ship's auxiliary power unit. The bolt he was tightening had stripped, and with a sharp pop, the wrench slipped. His forearm collided with the jagged edge of a vent panel, slicing deep into the muscle just below his elbow. He hissed in pain, clutching his arm, feeling the warm rush of blood pooling rapidly. His vision blurred slightly as he pressed his sleeve against the wound. His mind calculated the risks. Depth of the cut, significant. Bleeding rate, moderate but controlled with pressure. Potential contamination, high, given the location. "Damn it," he muttered, staggering slightly as he pushed himself upright. Nearby, Jalarn, a medic from the insectoid Rathal species, saw the blood and shrieked in a flurry of panic. "Human injured! Severe arterial compromise detected. Emergency response initiated." Before John could say a word, Jalarn triggered the emergency medical protocol. Red warning lights bathed the corridor. A synthesized voice blared. "Medical emergency. Prepare surgical suite." A team of alien medics converged, pulling a stretcher from a wall panel. John found himself firmly but gently guided toward the medical bay, despite his protests. His sleeve was cut away, revealing the deep laceration still oozing blood, though he'd kept pressure on it. Inside the medical suite, Jalarn and 2 others, a Farron named Valis and a Balathin named Croven, scrambled to prep surgical instruments. A tray of sterilized tools slid out from a concealed compartment. Lights brightened to a stark white, and an automated diagnostic scanner descended over John's arm. "Deep laceration confirmed," the scanner announced. "Suspected arterial involvement, immediate surgical intervention recommended." Croven's translucent skin flushed a warning red. "We need to control the hemorrhage and prevent systemic infection. Prepare for surgical decontamination." Ballas, already donning sterile gloves, reached for the anesthesia injector. "Initiating sedation." "Hold it," John interrupted, his voice strained but clear. The aliens paused, puzzled. John took a deep breath, pulled his multi-tool pouch from his belt and flipped it open with one hand. "I got this," he said. Jalarn's antennae twitched violently. "You are severely injured. You require surgery." John gave a small, lopsided grin despite the blood. "I said, I got this." He reached into the pouch and pulled out a small plastic vial of antiseptic, pouring it generously over the wound. He winced as the liquid seared the raw tissue, but he didn't stop. Grabbing a sterile cloth from his kit, he dabbed the wound dry, then retrieved a familiar small tube cyanoacrylate adhesive, the kind used in Earth's field medicine for decades. The alien medics watched in horrified fascination as he carefully squeezed a thin line of superglue into the edges of the wound, pinching the skin together with his fingertips. Blood welled slightly at the edges, but then slowed, the glue forming an immediate seal. Jalarn's voice rose to a near screech. "That is not a medical-grade closure! The wound needs internal suturing, vascular clamps." "Relax," John muttered through gritted teeth, pulling out a roll of gray duct tape from his kit. He tore a strip with his teeth, laid it across the wound for extra support, then wrapped his arm in a snug, compressive spiral. He flexed his fingers, checking circulation, then nodded in grim satisfaction. "Good as new," he said. The medics were speechless. Vallis's jaw hung slightly open. Croven's antennae were quivering. Jalarn made a series of frantic gestures. "This is unacceptable. This is primitive. You cannot. This is reckless." John sat back against the wall, his face pale but composed. "Look, I know how this looks. But on Earth we've been patching up field injuries with superglue and tape since before we had half your fancy equipment. This isn't ideal, but it'll hold until the tissue starts to knit. Besides, the bleeding's controlled, the wound's sealed, and I'll keep it clean. It's not pretty, but it works." Croven's voice was tight with disbelief. "You're suggesting this adhesive and tape are sufficient medical treatment?" John sighed. "Not forever. I'll need to change the dressing, watch for infection, and get antibiotics. But it's better than risking shock while you prep a full surgical suite." Vallis hesitated. "Your species' tolerance for improvisation is remarkable, but this is hardly standard protocol." "Welcome to human stubbornness," John muttered, shifting slightly to ease the ache in his arm. "You think we survived on Earth's backwoods and battlefields by waiting for fancy medical equipment? Sometimes you have to make do. And right now, I'm good. No surgery needed." Jalarn was still vibrating with frustration, but Croven placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Perhaps we should observe the human's condition over the next cycle. If signs of infection or dehiscence appear, we can intervene. But for now, he appears stable." John gave a weak thumbs up. "Told you, it's not about fancy tech. It's about grit, stubbornness, and a bit of ingenuity." The medics exchanged bewildered glances, then reluctantly stepped back, allowing John to lean more comfortably against the wall. Vallis finally spoke, her tone more thoughtful than before. "Perhaps there is something to learn from human resilience after all." The medical bay on Halcyon Reach had settled into an awkward silence following John's impromptu self-treatment. While the alien medics had stepped back, they hadn't gone far. They hovered nearby, speaking in hushed, rapid exchanges, their translator units struggling to keep up with the blend of medical jargon and incredulity. John, now propped up against a cushioned wall panel, glanced at the adhesive and tape assembly on his forearm. He flexed his hand gently. No tingling, no pallor, good circulation. The bleeding had stopped entirely, and the tape provided enough compression to keep the wound edges stable. His heart rate had normalized, though he still felt lightheaded from the blood loss. Vallis reapproached, clutching a portable scanner. "Human John Carter?" she began cautiously. "May we at least conduct a tissue integrity scan and monitor for internal bleeding? If your field closure fails—" "Sure," John said, offering his arm. "Scan away, I'm not an idiot. I'll take the data, just no scalpels, all right?" The scanner hummed softly as it passed over his arm. A 3D display bloomed in the air above them, showing layers of skin, muscle, and vasculature. The laceration was deep, but had sealed effectively with the adhesive, and the duct tape's pressure band acted almost like a makeshift compression dressing. The scan highlighted minor hematomas and bruising beneath the surface, but no major arterial damage. "Minimal subcutaneous hemorrhage," Vallis murmured, frowning at the display. "No major vessel compromise detected. The adhesive is holding for now, though it lacks tensile strength for prolonged support." Jalarn hovered, antennae twitching. "This cannot replace proper wound closure. The risk of infection is significant. The human must be administered systemic antibiotics immediately." John held up a hand. "I've got a course of broad-spectrum antibiotics in my kit. I'll start them today." He gestured toward a pouch clipped to his belt. "Field medics back on Earth always carry them for situations like this." Croven exhaled slowly, his disbelief softening into wary respect. "You anticipated needing them?" "Murphy's Law," John said with a tired smile. "Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and usually at the worst time." Vallis turned to Jalarn. "Prepare a monitored recovery suite. We will observe for signs of infection or systemic response. If his condition worsens, we will intervene with formal treatment. Until then, the human insists on self-management." Jalarn looked scandalized but ultimately relented. "Against all protocol, but if he deteriorates, we must act." With the formal emergency de-escalated, the tension in the medical bay eased slightly. John was assisted not on a stretcher, but under his own power, into a private observation chamber. The walls shimmered faintly with environmental controls, adjusting temperature and humidity to human norms. The medical monitors synced with his wearable device, tracking vitals continuously. As he settled onto the padded recliner, he pulled out his personal med kit, shaking out a foil packet of antibiotics and dry swallowing the first dose. He then applied a fresh layer of antiseptic to the skin surrounding the adhesive, careful not to disrupt the seal. "Why didn't you let them treat you?" a voice asked softly. It was Yaret, a young Xanthari medical trainee, who had lingered near the door, her pale green skin flushing faintly with curiosity. John looked up. "It's not about pride or proving anything. It's about practicality. I know my body, and I've seen what happens when panic and overreaction turn a manageable injury into a worse one. If they'd put me under and started surgery, I'd have lost more blood, taken longer to heal, and risked complications from a procedure I didn't need." Yaret's brows furrowed. "But the adhesive and tape—" He held up his arm. "This isn't forever. It's a stopgap. Back home we use superglue in the field because it's fast and keeps the wound closed long enough for natural healing or proper medical care later. The tape is just extra support. It's crude but effective when you know what you're doing." She hesitated. "And if infection sets in?" "I'll catch it early," John said simply. "I know the signs: redness, swelling, warmth, pus, fever. If I see any of that, I'll let you guys handle it. But for now, this'll do." Over the next few hours, John rested while the alien medics rotated through, checking his vitals and scanning the wound site. Jalaran hovered anxiously each time, muttering under his breath about the irresponsibility of human field medicine. Meanwhile, the story of John's self-treatment spread through the ship's corridors. By the next shift change, half the crew knew about the human who'd slapped superglue and tape on a deep laceration and shrugged off the need for surgery. Some found it reckless, others whispered admiration for the sheer audacity of it. In the mess hall, crew members from various species gathered in clusters, replaying the tale with increasing embellishment. By the time Yaret joined them for a break, the story had morphed into legends of humans with bone-deep cuts, closed with glue, and field repairs that would make a cyborg flinch. "It's not legend," Yaret corrected, setting her tray down. "I saw it. He did it himself, said it was about practicality and knowing his limits." A Bailiff engineer nearby shook his head. "Humans are baffling. Why trust glue over sterile sutures?" "Because sometimes," Yaret said quietly, "they value speed and simplicity over precision, and they know their bodies can take it." Back in the med bay, John woke from a light nap as Daniel Hayes, the ship's human senior medic, entered. Daniel had been on another deck during the initial incident, and now examined John's arm carefully. He whistled low. "You really went for the old field glue and wrap trick?" Daniel asked. John grinned weakly. It held. Daniel crouched beside him. "It's ugly but effective. You're lucky the cut wasn't deeper, or across a joint. Keep an eye on it. Change the dressing twice a day, and if you feel any heat or see redness spreading, you call me immediately." John nodded. "Deal." Daniel looked toward the observation window where the alien medic still watched, equal parts cautious and curious. "Looks like you've made an impression. They'll be talking about this one for cycles to come." John shrugged. "Just doing what I had to do." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's what they don't quite get yet. It's not that humans are reckless, it's that we're resourceful when it counts." And with that, John settled back into the recliner, his breathing steady and his arms secured. Around him, the hum of the ship and the quiet curiosity of the alien crew marked not just recovery, but a growing understanding of human resilience. Messy, stubborn, and entirely real. The next ship cycle brought more curious glances and whispered conversations. John's arm, while still wrapped in duct tape and layered with fresh dressings, was holding up well. Daniel Hayes checked it twice a day, noting that the swelling was minimal, the color healthy, and there were no signs of spreading redness or infection. The adhesive had formed a solid bond over the wound, and the pressure wrap kept the tissue aligned. Despite this, the alien medical staff remained skeptical. Valis and Jalarn shadowed Danielle's rounds, their expressions a mix of scientific curiosity and professional worry. Valis's pale green fingers hovered over the latest scan as she murmured, "It remains remarkable. The human's body is maintaining homeostasis despite the absence of internal suturing." Daniel tapped the screen. "It's not miraculous. It's simple, practical first aid. The glue bonded the tissue edges and the duct tape provided external pressure. The risk of infection is always present, but with careful monitoring and a solid immune system, it's manageable." Jalarn's antennae twitched sharply. "This cannot become standard procedure. Our training does not permit such." "Nobody's suggesting we replace surgery with glue and tape," Daniel said calmly, "but sometimes a quick, practical response can stabilize a situation long enough for proper care. John didn't choose this method because he thought it was better. He did it because it was the only immediate option that kept him from bleeding out while you were prepping for surgery." Jalarn harumphed softly but didn't argue. Instead, he focused on the portable monitor tracking John's vitals. His blood pressure is within acceptable range. White cell count is elevated but not indicative of acute infection. His recovery appears stable. That afternoon, as John stretched his legs in the observation suite under Daniel's supervision, Yaret and a few other curious alien trainees gathered in the doorway. They watched quietly as John flexed his arm experimentally, the dressing shifting slightly with the movement, but holding. "Feels tight," John admitted, "but no pain, just a little stiffness." Daniel nodded. "That's normal. We'll replace the dressing after you've had a chance to move around a bit." Yaret stepped closer. "Is it true that on Earth, humans use adhesive and tape for injuries all the time?" John smiled faintly. "Not for everything. But in the field, when we don't have access to medical facilities, yeah, we use what we've got. Adhesive is quick and helps seal wounds. Tape can act as a compression bandage. It's not a replacement for stitches, but it's better than bleeding out." One of the Balathan trainees frowned. "What about the risk of contaminants? Isn't it dangerous?" Daniel stepped in. "Absolutely. That's why John used antiseptic before applying the adhesive. It reduces the microbial load and gives the immune system a better chance to handle any residual contamination. He also started antibiotics immediately, which will help fend off bacterial infections." The aliens exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from incredulity to reluctant respect. Jalarn, though still hovering nearby, said nothing. Over the next 2 ship cycles, John's wound showed steady improvement. The swelling reduced further, the skin around the closure looked healthy, and no fever or localized redness appeared. Daniel replaced the dressing with a breathable medical wrap, retiring the duct tape with a faint smile. "Looks like you'll heal cleanly," Daniel said as he checked the site one last time. "Give it a couple more days and the glue will start sloughing off naturally. No sign of infection." John flexed his fingers. "Told you. Good as new." The alien medics couldn't deny the evidence. Valis, standing at the back of the room, murmured, "There is an undeniable resilience in human physiology. The improvisation is startlingly effective, though it contradicts every protocol we've been trained to follow." Daniel nodded. "It's not ideal, but it works. Human adaptability isn't about recklessness. It's about making the best of what you've got, even if it means using glue and tape when nothing else is available." As word of John's recovery spread through Halcyon Reach, the crew's respect for human ingenuity deepened. The initial whispers of recklessness evolved into a grudging admiration. Jalarn, though he never outright endorsed the method, stopped protesting when John passed by, merely offering a nod of acknowledgement. By the end of the week, John was cleared to return to light duty. The ship's captain even commented during the morning briefing, "Let this incident be a reminder that resilience comes in many forms. Sometimes, survival isn't about having the best tools. It's about having the knowledge and grit to use what you have." That evening, as John sat in the mess hall with a steaming mug of coffee, Yaret approached hesitantly. "Human John," she said softly, "may I ask you something?" John nodded. "Sure." She gestured to his arm. "Do you think other species could learn this method? Could it work for them in emergencies?" John considered the question. "Maybe. But it depends on their physiology. Human skin and tissue heal a certain way. Other species might react differently to adhesives or pressure. But the principle is the same. Stop the bleeding, close the wound, protect from infection. Adapt it to fit the species. Urette's eyes gleamed with curiosity. Perhaps we could study this, develop cross-species emergency protocols that incorporate improvisation when needed. John grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. As Urette smiled and returned to her table, Daniel joined John with his own mug. You've made an impression, Daniel said. They're already drafting proposals for a new emergency response module, one that includes field improvisation techniques. John laughed quietly. I guess duct tape diplomacy works after all. Daniel clinked his mug against John's. To stubbornness, ingenuity, and knowing when to patch yourself up and when to ask for help. John raised his mug in return. I'll drink to that. And with that, the human engineer and the alien medics found common ground, not in the sophistication of their tools, but in the shared understanding that sometimes survival comes down to quick thinking, resilience, and a willingness to do whatever it takes to keep going. By the start of the next ship cycle, John Carter was cleared for full duty, though Daniel insisted on a few more days of light lifting and periodic check-ins. The wound had closed cleanly, the adhesive breaking down naturally as skin and muscle fused back into working order. Even the once-alarmed alien medics couldn't deny the effectiveness of the humans' improvisation, though none of them seemed eager to replicate it. But while John's arm healed, a shift was happening aboard Halcyon Reach. Word of his quick-thinking treatment, and the conversation it sparked, had spread to the higher echelons of the ship's command structure. The captain, a stately Elnari named Sovrel, called for a cross-species medical conference. Daniel Hayes and Dr. Vallis were tasked with presenting a report on the incident. As they gathered data and prepared slides showing John's injury, treatment steps, recovery progress, and follow-up care, they noticed a quiet anticipation among the crew. Even the skeptical Jalarn seemed more subdued, nodding thoughtfully at each review of John's recovery scan. The conference hall was filled with delegates from every species on board: engineers, scientists, medical staff, and command officers. The large display screen glowed with medical diagrams, side-by-side images of the wound, before and after treatment, and annotated notes on John's self-treatment process. Daniel opened the session with calm authority. We are here today because an incident that could have resulted in major surgical intervention was managed with simple field techniques: superglue, antiseptic, and duct tape. While unconventional, it highlights critical lessons about adaptability and emergency response in multi-species environments. Vallis took over, pointing to the anatomical diagrams. Human tissue resilience, rapid clot formation, and immune response enabled the successful sealing of a deep laceration without formal surgery. However, this approach would not apply universally. Species-specific considerations are vital. What saved John's arm could have endangered a Belathan or Fearon patient. Sovrel, seated at the center of the command table, leaned forward. Then what is your recommendation? Daniel gestured to the display behind him. Education. Incorporate interspecies medical training that covers basic anatomy, wound management, and improvisational techniques tailored to each physiology. Preparedness isn't just about the right tools, it's about the right knowledge. Jalarn spoke up, his voice steady and clear. Though I opposed the humans' methods initially, I concede the outcome was better than expected. But we must be cautious. This should not become an excuse for recklessness. Formal protocols exist for a reason. John, seated near the back, stood and cleared his throat. Nobody's saying we throw out the protocols. What I did wasn't meant to replace proper medical care. It was about survival, getting the bleeding stopped and keeping the wound sealed until help arrived. If I'd waited for a full surgical prep, I could have lost too much blood. The right call at the right time with the right tools, however basic, is what saved me. The room was silent for a moment. Then Sovrel nodded slowly. A balanced approach, then. Training in improvisational techniques combined with an understanding of formal medical protocols. We adapt. we prepare, and we respect the strengths of each species. The conference concluded with the decision to establish a new training module aboard Halcyon Reach. It would cover emergency improvisation, species-specific first aid, and a deeper understanding of how different physiologies responded to trauma. John was invited to contribute his field experience to the curriculum design. In the days that followed, John found himself surprisingly in demand. Crew members from multiple species approached him in the corridors, asking to hear the story firsthand. Some asked about the mechanics of using adhesive in the field. Others were curious about Earth's approach to emergency medicine and resilience training. One afternoon, Yoret found John in the engineering bay, replacing a damaged relay. "John," she said quietly, "we're setting up the first cross-species emergency response workshop next week. Would you be willing to lead the practical session on field improvisation?" John looked up, his good arm flexing slightly. "You're serious?" She smiled. "Very. You showed us that survival isn't always about precision or the most advanced tools. It's about adaptability. That's something we can all learn from." He nodded. "All right. I'll bring the kit and walk everyone through it, just don't expect it to look pretty." When the day of the workshop arrived, the room was filled with trainees from every species aboard. A long table was set with sealed pouches of medical supplies, antiseptics, adhesives, compression wraps, and yes, a roll of gray duct tape. Daniel stood to the side, observing with quiet approval. John demonstrated step by step, explaining each action and why it mattered. He showed how to clean a wound in less than ideal conditions, how to seal it quickly when sutures weren't an option, and how to apply pressure without cutting off circulation. He emphasized the importance of knowing when these methods were stopgaps, not solutions. Afterward, as the trainees practiced on synthetic models, Yoret whispered to John, "This will change how we respond in emergencies. You've made a bigger impact than you realize." John shrugged, a little embarrassed. It wasn't about making an impact. It was about staying alive and getting the job done. Later that evening, as he sat in the mess hall with Daniel, a quiet sense of accomplishment settled over him. His arm was almost fully healed, his movements easy and unencumbered. Daniel raised a mug of coffee. "To resilience and to duct tape diplomacy," he said with a grin. John clinked his mug in response. "To knowing when to trust your gut and when to trust your glue." The two of them sat in companionable silence, the hum of the ship around them steady and familiar. Outside the viewport, stars stretched endlessly, a reminder of how vast the universe was, and how sometimes survival wasn't about sophistication, it was about stubbornness, grit, and a willingness to do whatever it took to make it through. And as Halcyon Reach continued its journey through the stars, its crew carried with them not just the memory of one human's improvised repair, but a deeper respect for the resilience that bound them all together, no matter how alien their physiology might be.